Good evening. I'm Jenny Stimson, and I welcome you tonight on behalf of the Neighborhoods Committee. And you might say, this doesn't look like a neighborhood of Seattle. But Lorraine told me that she had prepared this presentation, and she thought that residents here would be interested in it. And I knew that anything that Lorraine did, we would be interested in. And besides, she runs a history research group that's a subcommittee of the Neighborhoods Committee. So that gave us a little excuse for it. But any opportunity to hear Lorraine is worth coming. Lorraine, as you may know, has her PhD in history from the University of Washington, and she's the historian emeritus of MOHI. And it's such a blessing to have you here, Lorraine. Thank you for being part of our community. So this is, we have two purposes in sharing this program. One, we know it'll be interesting, but also it's about the importance of having really good archives so that people that want to go back and learn about places later can find out things, as she'll share with us what she's learned by looking at these archives. So I think during your talk, you're going to give us a little pitch for making sure our archives here at Horizon House are strong, right? So let's welcome Lorraine. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, everyone. It's just such a pleasure. We moved here in April, and now I think I know all of your faces and maybe 90% of your names. So that's a big step forward. It's an honor to be invited to offer this presentation tonight, especially since, as Ginny has made clear, it's like inappropriate for the Neighborhoods Committee, but I get to do it anyway. I think it's an important place to start just by critiquing the title of this book. This book is this book, and it's in your library, and probably I'll be showing you about 25% of what is in this book tonight in this high-speed tour. But this title, as you can imagine, is completely inaccurate. There was no new land north of the Columbia. There was no wilderness here. This was native ground. This was native water. And that's where we have to start. And this is not an analytical lecture. It's a tasting menu of archival material. And I think for archivists, it's going to be a buffet delight, because that's all I'm going to be showing you tonight are documents. And as a historian in museums, I've gotten kind of accustomed to staging exhibitions that use artifacts and art and oral history and video as part of the evidence for the argument. But in a gallery, you very seldom get to use a lot of documents because they take a little time. And for high-speed tours of galleries, that just doesn't work. But I do love these things, and I hope that you will love them too. What I did in 2009 and 10, I don't drive a car, so that made this even more exciting and complicated. My husband, Rob, and friends and public transportation took me to 40 archives in Washington State, from really, really little ones to really, really big ones. And I wanted to almost prove to myself that a narrative of Washington territorial and state history could be shown, not told, perhaps, in a tour of the state. So each place I went to, if there was a curator or the volunteer at the front desk, I said, what are the 5 coolest documents in your collection? And oftentimes no one knew. So then we went on a voyage of discovery. So you're going to join me in the tasting menu buffet of my voyage of discovery. But there are some interesting and entertaining and even amusing documents that we'll see. But history is dangerous. Not everything that we're going to see is a laugh riot. You go into the past, you go into danger space. So just be expecting that a bit. I know you have been enjoying this map. This is a map of the Columbia Valley, really at the beginning of the Great Depression. This is one of the many, many, many maps through time and in the Depression that described Washington. But let's go from here. So I mentioned that this is native ground, native water. This is a mixed world document. This is a document that James Tobin, a settler of Olympia, drafted with native informants. And if you can look around there, you can see the harbor line of Olympia. You can orient yourself by Black Lake. But what you'll see is that Tobin has taken the Lachute seed names that he is being told by his native informant to inscribe them on this map. This is one of the ways that we can document the geographical understanding of native people. I'm going to be moving fast. You should look at the book if you want to know more about anything. This is Fort Vancouver. The Hudson's Bay Company was here long before American settlers were, and the Hudson's Bay Company was a worldwide mercantile organization that did not try to convert native people to Christianity, did not try to govern them, but really imposed a kind of new economy on the native world, where native people were encouraged by a trading post to trap for fur and then bring the fur to the Hudson's Bay Company trading post and receive goods in return. Look at the size of Fort Vancouver. You can see here the big basket that the Hudson's Bay Company represented in terms of orchards, in terms of shipbuilding, in terms of international trade, in terms of agriculture. Just about every kind of topic in settler history you see here. The Hudson's Bay Company will be forced out. The Oregon country was organized as a territory in 1848, and then after that, in 1853, Washington Territory split off. And this is just a marvelous thing. It's actually an artifact. It's a stamp like you would put on any formal document. But I took this off a proclamation in the Washington State Archives because I wanted a nice big representation of it. This is not great art for the art lovers in the audience, but it is very communicating. You see the Lady Hope. Many goddesses in the past have represented this, so don't know exactly who she's intended to be, but you see behind her the Washington Territory of 1853, the first year the territory was created. There's a log hut. It's really not even quite a cabin. There's a wagon from the overland trail, and on her skirt there's an anchor, because this is Western Washington we're talking about. We're talking about the Pacific coast. And she's gesturing toward the future, saying Alki. Old-timers say Alki, but the word means the same thing. It means in a little while, in the Chinook trading jargon. And she is saying, in a little while, we will move from this log hut to this future. Look at the future. I don't know. Is it Europe? Is it Florence? Is it some Naples? Some fantastic city of the future where steam engines are the high technology of the day. You see the side wheel steamers there in the future. So this is the emblem of Washington Territory. And we were a territory here from 1853 until 1889, a very long apprenticeship. This is the first governor of Washington Territory. This is an engraving. This is Isaac Ingalls Stevens in his brigadier general in the U.S. Army uniform. So this is not 1853. He was appointed by President Franklin Pierce. When you're a territory, all of your significant functionaries are appointed either by cabinet members or by the president himself. So 2 Democratic presidents in a row, Franklin Pierce, James Buchanan, really staffed Washington Territory for a good long time. Isaac Ingalls Stevens was the first governor here, and very much a Democrat of his day. He was pro-slavery, pro-states' rights. He managed the Breckinridge campaign, if you're familiar with the politics of the antebellum period. But when the attack on Fort Sumter took place, he said, well, I'm out. You know, I'm a soldier in the United States Army, and I'm going to enlist in the Union Army. He did a complete reversal. He's a very troubled and complicated guy. So here he is, the governor of the territory, but a few years later during the Civil War, at the Battle of Chantilly, fighting for the Union, where he will lose his life. His major job was treaties. 5 treaties in about 8 months. They were rammed through, and Native people had very little say or understanding, and this signature page of the Treaty of Point Elliott, Mukilteo, makes that really clear. You can see the line of all of Isaac Stevens there to the far right, and then all of the other functionaries signing their names, and Native people drafting their X's. This treaty was negotiated in the Chinook trading jargon, and we've already seen the word Alki or Alki, but there are many other examples of Chinook trading jargon very much in our present-day speech. Skookumchuck, where skookum means strong, and chuck is a body of water. So Skookumchuck is a rapids, or a place where there's lots of high waves at high tide. In the Chinook trading jargon, an American is a Boston. A British person is a King George. Ish at the end of any word means river. Skokomish, Delawamish, Samish, all of that. Ish means river. So this is the Chinook dictionary, and there's many of them through time. But this is the language in which the treaties were negotiated with Native people, where they were asked to make their X and sign away hundreds of thousands of square miles of territory in the Pacific Northwest. It is a tragic thing. I want to spend just a little bit of time on this. I'm worried about timing. This is the plan of Seattle that was drawn during what one might expect after I've described these treaties, and that's a war against them. As soon as Native people realized what a reservation meant and how cold and barren and miserable the land was that they were assigned to, a healthy percentage of every tribe in the state, in the territory, went to war. This is Seattle. Okay, how can I orient you here? You see the dock labeled M, that's Yesler's dock. Henry Yesler brought the first steam engine to Puget Sound. It was a 15-horsepower steam engine that powered an agricultural mill that he winched up the Seattle beach. And you see that round area that says sawdust? That's exactly what it is. Sawdust. Okay, I don't know how to make it on all of these, but it's immediately behind the dock. That's where his mill is, right? And heading to the east up the hill is Yesler Way, Skid Road, right? You'd be skidding logs down to the mill to be cut up into lumber, to be put onto ships. So you see 2 ships in the bay there. The one to the north is a USS Decatur. The one to the south is a lumber bark for San Francisco. This is the first major export of Washington Territory, lumber, from Seattle. But if you look up above the trees, hills and woods thronged with Indians, that's about where we live. And it was solid timber all the way. Am I doing something wrong?
No.
Okay.
Point it back on.
Oh, yeah. I'm scared of it. Stop. Oh, cool. Ah! All right, there's the lake trail. That's Yesler Way. So the lake trail goes over to Lake Washington, which is over here. The hills and woods up here are thronged with Indians. This map, this battle plan, was drawn by a lieutenant on board the USS Decatur, and it's the oldest image that we have of the settlement here. It's really, really cool. You can see the buildings down here. There's just a string of them. There's about 20 buildings in the settlement of Seattle and about 50 settlers. Some of you know I'm interested in deserters, and this is where I got started, because even in these sort of grim circumstances, sailors from the Decatur fled for the trees as fast as they could. But you can see the layout of the divisions here of Marines. So the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy came to the Pacific Northwest to enforce the treaties. That's the purpose of the military here. That's why the Pacific Squadron dispatched the Decatur to this place. Oh, isn't that just a great image? You see right here, this is the first brothel in Seattle, right? It's called Madame Damnable's. You can see it down here somewhere. Madame Damnable's. And she was called Madame Damnable because of her language. She was loud, she was brassy, and she was profane. And she was recognized by sailors on the Decatur as having run a brothel in Maryland, Baltimore, in Baltimore, Maryland. So one could talk about any of these for an hour, but we can't. So we've mentioned the Civil War. We're really moving pretty fast through time here. Our third governor, Richard Dickerson Golson, was a slave owner in Kentucky and Texas. And he, of course, had been appointed by James Buchanan, a Democratic pro-slavery, pro-South president, who's really presiding over the antebellum breakup of the Union by the end of the 1860s. And this is a piece of correspondence. This is the sort of thing that one would find in an archive. And believe me, not all archives are digitized. Not all archival material is available digitally. And I don't know that it ever can be. There is so much. So this is a resignation letter that Richard Dickerson Golson wrote to the Secretary of State of James Buchanan, saying, unwilling even for a day to hold office under a so-called Republican president. With my cordial thanks to President Buchanan for the honor of its bestowal, I hereby tender my resignation of the office of Governor of Washington Territory. Golson went back to Kentucky and worked very hard to make that state secede. It did not, so our governor left to go to Tennessee and acted on behalf of the Confederacy throughout the war. Pretty cool. There are a fair number of documents in the archives that are signed by famous people. So A. Lincoln, undoubtedly written by a clerk, but it does say A. Lincoln on this military telegram. Governor Pickering, okay, so Lincoln's president now, right? And he's a Republican, because he's going to sweep all of those Democrats out of office, from the governor all the way down to postal inspectors, dog catchers. Everybody goes, and they get replaced with Republicans. So it's just a total sweep of patronage, and Governor Pickering is no exception. He's a Republican appointee. And Lincoln, or someone speaking for Lincoln, says, your patriotic dispatch of yesterday received and will be published. It couldn't be less interesting. I just thought you might want to see Lincoln's name. But this is part of the dangerous history. People of Chinese extraction came to the Pacific Northwest, and indeed to the West, and indeed to the United States to work. And they ran up against organized labor. The first organized labor actions in Metro Seattle are against Chinese people. 3 Chinese hops pickers were executed in the beginning of 1885 as they slept in their tents in Puyallup. But what you see here is kind of the way one of my pages is organized. I wanted you to sort of see that. So you see the Chinese must go. That is the masthead of a daily newspaper in Seattle, the Seattle Daily Call. And that is a guy in a top hat chasing against a Chinese laborer with a cue trailing out behind his back. The Chinese must go. That is the motto of the masthead of the Daily Call. And underneath it you see the notice of a meeting. A large delegation from all points on the Sound assemble in Yesler's Hall. So this is a mass movement to force Chinese to leave the West Coast. And up above, you see the advertisement for that restaurant, which even the restaurant advertising in the Daily Call takes this motto, uses this notion in its advertising. But one of the great finds of my research trip was this hand-scrawled, almost illiterate note to Henry Yesler that turned up in a very strange folder. H.L. Yesler, I warn you to go slow, let the China biz alone, for I got 25 pounds of dynamite within 1 mile off Seattle to dispose of any time after November 1st. And then there's a list of local supporters of Chinese labor to be notified, and then there's a skull and crossbones. This is an incredible find. When you think about the collecting plan of most libraries, museums, they're not collecting this kind of scrawled, ill-written things, and I'm just so glad that it's there. So the anti-Chinese riots were not only in Seattle in 1886 in February, they were also in Tacoma. And not all archives are in English. And I'm not showing you a lot of examples of other foreign language archives because I don't have the time, but it's not because there aren't any. What this is a handwritten list of the stores and businesses belonging to Chinese owners in Tacoma that were destroyed by arson the day after the riots in Seattle. This was very, very real, and the Anti-Chinese Exclusion Act really forced Chinese out of Seattle for some time. If you're familiar with the Museum of History and Industry, one of the stellar artifacts on display there is a salmon butchering machine that was patented by its inventor as the iron chink, an ugly racist slur that is bolted right onto the machine. So no mistake can be made that this machine is intended to mechanize salmon butchering and replace a distinctive group of workers. So James Blaine sends this telegraph in 1889 to Elisha Ferry, who was the governor at the time. The president signed a proclamation declaring Washington to be a state. And this is 1889, and we came in an omnibus bill. A lot of things changed. Washington residents could now vote in presidential elections, which they had not been able to do. They could elect their own governor, which they had not been able to do. That was always appointed. So statehood made a big difference. And you see a huge surge of population in 1887, 8, 9, 90. But Seattle burned to the ground, Spokane burned to the ground, and Ellensburg burned to the ground, all three cities in that year of 1889. Why is that? This place had grown so fast, without hydrants, without water supply, without zoning, without any kind of building standards, that it was, if you wanted to design a city to burn, the city that you're looking at on this hand-tinted lantern slide, this is the city you would design. The sidewalk is wooden. The buildings are wooden. Everything is wooden, and there just wasn't enough pressure in the hydrant system to fight this fire. But one thing that's cool that you can see here is the first streetcar in Seattle. It's horse-drawn, but it's on rails. You see the rails in the street? It's really kind of a cool thing. So this is compared to the Great Seattle Fire, June 6, 1889. This daily time book may seem pretty unimportant to you, but it is very important. This is the Lars Wold Farm in Puyallup, where they were raising hops, and he's employing Native people. This is a time book for Native people. And you can see Charlie Moses up here, and there's a number of workers named Moses. That is the clan name of the Duwamish tribe in the Renton area. You see Squaw Liza here. So again, squaw, a Chinook trading jargon word, or kluchman is another word for a Native woman. So these are all Native people who are employed in the hops business. I'm sure you're familiar with photographs of hops pickers, but this is neat because it records the number of days worked and the rate worked, and you can do economic history with this, or this. So the Klondike Gold Rush, we often think 1898, right? But it's 10 years long. It starts in 1898, it really goes through 1909. And the goal of the gold rush seekers may move around. So sometimes it's Nome, sometimes it's in Alaska, sometimes it's in other spots in Alaska, or it goes back into the Yukon Territory in Canada. But wherever it is, hopeful gold seekers who think they might be part of the 10% who actually strike gold. And very few people realized how few, that 90% of the poor souls would not find gold. Here in Seattle, the business community mined the miners. And they realized that they didn't have to go to the diggings to make a fortune. I hope you're reading this list that's up here. You can read it in the book, of course, too. But the Canadian government began to insist at the bottom of the Chilkoot Pass that you had to go up the pass with this much stuff so that they didn't have to go bail you out in January when you were hungry. So look at this. This is everything from food to medicine to liquor to a gold pan to a revolver. everything that you might need. And if you bought all of this, it's about $400. Okay, that's not a lot of money. But if you multiply it by 100,000, it is. Because that's the number of would-be gold seekers that came through Seattle over that decade. This is a huge surge for Seattle business. And what comes out of that is Seattle parks, Seattle literature, Seattle museums. It's just a big leap forward. So this advertisement was in the Seattle Times, but you could look in the PI, you could look anywhere and see the advertisers of the newspaper and the reporters and even the editorialists of the newspapers working hand in hand to buoy Seattle's fortunes. There's a lot of greeting cards in archives, and how dull is that? But this is a lovely hand-tinted card from a woman named Etta, who sent it in 1911 and signed it, and she colored the front of it here. And it's from Redmond. This is the east side of Lake Sammamish, so that's either the Monahan Mill or the Campbell Mill. But what it really is the machine in the garden. This is the machine in the garden, and the garden is this place of inexhaustible timber. At the beginning, say 1860 to 1895, inexhaustible salmon, inexhaustible timber, inexhaustible coal. You couldn't use it up if you lived for 40 lifetimes. That kind of exploitation of natural resources, that was Washington Territory's métier, if you will. So this is just a greeting card, and I kind of want you to think of it as not just a greeting card. It represents 400,000 greeting cards that are in archives and libraries throughout Washington State. I want to show you a few photographs. I know I've been very light-handed with the photographs, but I wanted to pick these 5 because these families, to me, they look at us, they gaze at us through the decades, through time, and they have their stories in their eyes. You look at a family like this, Dan Boone, the Native American man, he's a saddle maker at Fort Simcoe, and that's his family. Look at the way they've dressed. Look at the mixed world that they represent, where their jewelry and their clothing and their accessories differ tremendously from him to his wife and to his children. They represent that a difficult transition of conquest and of resistance. That is the story of Native people here. No one knows who these people are. I bet you have photographs in your apartments upstairs where you don't know who the people are in those photographs. Isn't it tragic? They look at us with such trust over the decades, and we can't repay that trust because we don't know who they are. This is a marvelous photo of a Buddhist wedding held at the White River Valley Buddhist Temple, which is still there down the valley. But they're dressed in what we might call American finery, if you will. So they've gotten a Buddhist ceremony, they're in a Buddhist temple, but they're dressed to a large degree like any American couple would be in their time. This is John and Gertrude Chatters, and their children are named Eva and Owen. All of these, I should have mentioned, they're obviously studio portraits. So these are people of some means in order to do this. But again, what strikes me, what compels me, are the stares over the century as they look right at us to be acknowledged as people. Chinese-American family. I don't know the family history of this family, but again, we see this mingling of cultures where the husband is dressed in a business suit with a tie, and the wife is wearing traditional, I think, quasi-traditional Chinese dress. Again, it's just an interesting part of becoming American. I like menus, and I found lots of them in my travels. Don't menus tell us a lot? You can look critically at the Horizon House menu and think, my gosh, why this? Why that? Why are we offering this? Why are we not offering that anymore? But this is from, let me see, Fairhaven, the Grandview Dining Hall. Come back here, you. And look at how heavy it is on steaks and chops and meat and really heavy caloried meals. There's not a lot of salads there. you know? Anyway, you can do this kind of sort of culinary history, which is sort of social history, cultural history, economic history, using menus, and it is way fun. So I'll give you a little time to let the gently risque humor of this postcard work its way into your consciousness. Here comes Maud with her little bear behind. And it's just, I put it up here so it would make you laugh, but also to think about postcards. Postcards are very widely represented in archives, and you think, why do people send them? Why are people glad to get them? And who decides what gets depicted on postcards? I mean, this is sort of charming, but you wouldn't maybe send it to your mom, unless you had sort of an interesting mom, maybe the kind of mom who lives at Horizon House. But there are many, many other postcards. We'll see a couple more here in a little bit. But postcards represent how we want to be seen as a community. If you look around postcards in downtown Seattle, there's things they don't show, and there's things they do show. There's things they emphasize, and things they underemphasize. This is an amazing find. These are letters from 1905 on Colonial Hotel stationery by a prostitute. And the only reason that we have them, because again, no collecting plan in Spokane said, oh, we definitely need to collect correspondence from prostitutes, that's job one. But where this was found was taped in a drawer in a bureau. Right? So you push the drawer in, and the letters are all taped back there. And a young couple bought the bureau at some sort of a sale. And they took it home, and they're cleaning it up, and they come across these letters. And they ended up at the Eastern Washington Historical Society. But what a find this is. At Mohi, where I worked, we have so many wedding dresses. I mean, you could gown all brides for all time. But we have very little underwear. And we have very few aprons. These are the kind of things that didn't get saved. They didn't seem to be worthwhile until you're trying to figure out what people wore at the time. But this set of letters from a woman who calls herself a sport, and she tells her lover, to whom these letters are written, Johnny Weber, that she wants to leave the life behind, that she wants to go with him to the Klondike, and she'll support him any way she can, that she knows how to do that. It makes you cry. It's just a very classic sort of bad relationship, I guess, between a man and a woman. But the fact that, again, everything I'm showing you, we could spend an hour on each one of these documents. So there's not a whole lot more I can tell you, except this woman in 1905 was a drug taker, she had had an abortion, and she was a prostitute in love with a guy who sounds like kind of a bad guy. And did she even send the letters? Why are they in the back of a drawer in Spokane? Very, very mysterious. So the Seattle Times ran a series on Seattle women who maintained their independence. And this was in the rotogravure section of the Times in 1905. This woman is a cigar maker, and she makes cigars at a factory in the Rainier Valley, and that's what we see her doing there. And this is a time when work towards suffrage for women is very, very much top of mind, front of mind. And women who are independent, that idea will grow and grow and grow until we have Capitol Hill here, First Hill, where you see all of these apartments that all went up in the 1920s for single girls to live in while they went to secretarial school or nursing school, to live, or teaching college, to live a life for themselves. So the Times is a little bit ahead of its time here. But I thought the color was beautiful, and I just wanted you to see it. So this is a periodical, Votes for Women, the magazine that won equal suffrage in Washington. The push toward women's suffrage is a very long story, and it's got ups and downs, and I'm not gonna tell it. But what we see here is the 1910 celebration of the arrival of the franchise. And if you deconstruct that image, it's really strange. So we have the suffrage leaders on the left here, May Arkwright Hutton and so forth, and they've delivered a baby to Uncle Sam that's named Washington. Isn't that weird? I think that's like beyond weird on the cover of a magazine of this sort. But periodicals like this are very much a part of archives. Continuing the notion of a mixed world, this is an advertising brochure for a realtor in Seattle, C.B. Bussell. And he shows us native people, and we can't see their faces, but we can read their body English. They're not ecstatic about what they're looking at. They're looking from Vashon Island or Bainbridge Island across Elliott Bay to Seattle. And this is a time when the Denny Hills have pretty much been regraded, and the fill used for the tide flats, which Bussell calls tide lands, because he's selling them. So talking about tide flats is a bit, they smell. Tide lands, I guess, don't smell. But what these native people are seeing is a smokestack city, the smokestack city of Seattle, which was the goal of the earliest settlers here, the Dennys, the Borans, the Lees, the Terrys, the Esslers. They wanted an industrial city that was at the hinge between transcontinental railroads and transoceanic steamers. And that is the place that Seattle came to occupy. And we see that here in this rather melancholy image. Now we go over to the Okanagan Valley. And this is a bit Seattle-centric tonight, I'm afraid, but not entirely. So here you have this goddess, I think it's Gaia, but it could be a lot of goddesses. And she's got a cornucopia under her left arm. And all of this stuff is coming out. So this is 1905. Again, this is the Okanagan Review newspaper. And it's drawn by an illustrator on the newspaper staff. And 2 years earlier, the Federal Reclamation Bureau had begun to distribute irrigation water in the Okanagan, making possible this cornucopia of delight that we see here. And look at the old settler. Could you draw a more reprobate kind of guy? I mean, this is not your pioneer that you put, a saintly halo around. Look at that snarky face. I mean, he looks like he's put something over on somebody. And he's just going to enjoy the wealth of the Okanagan Valley that the federal government has made possible for him. This is a postcard of downtown Yakima. It really did have a downtown. And is very proud. The Chamber of Commerce, the boosters of Yakima are very proud. There's horses on this paved street, but there's also an electric streetcar. It's 1910. It's very early. There's a couple of automobiles there. And why? Well, the apple is the king of fruit, says the Yakima Orchard Securities Company. So here merged together a postcard with a brochure, and it's the kind of brochure that the Chamber of Commerce would have flooded the United States with to encourage investment and settlement. Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition in 1909. Wow. What you're looking at here is a bird's eye view, and let's see. That's Mount Rainier. Doesn't look like Mount Rainier, but it really, really is. And this, strangely, is Mercer Island. So we're looking, south, and we're looking from the north side of the University of Washington campus. And you can see Frosh Pond here. That's still where it is today. And let's see. Maybe this is the architecture building that's still standing, and this is Denny Hall. So there are some landmarks in this image that help orient us to the current University of Washington campus. But most of what you see here is just extravagant, very architecture that's intended to look like Versailles for 6 months. And it began to leak, and it began to fall down. I mean, it's a World's Fair. It was not meant to be campus buildings, with the exception of the old architecture hall. But 3 million people attended this fair in 1909. World's Fairs open up the windows of the world on the city, and they open up the windows of the world from the city to the world. It's this mutual, this reciprocity. And this fair, like all others, had lots of high art and culture. You could look at the old masters, you could listen to Mozart, or you could go have fun on the pay streak and ride rides and eat cotton candy and watch rodeo riders. It's very much a fair of its time. They gave away a baby at this fair. The the Seattle orphanage. They had a day where, you know, you bought your ticket and you got to keep the stub. So all the stubs had numbers on them. So someone bought, you know, won a baby from the Seattle orphanage. And I had a student years ago who was an attorney who did a lot of work on this, and that's another story. But also the Igorot display. So the Igorot people are Filipino hill people, and they were brought by an impresario on a series of World's Fairs. And they would come into your town and take off their clothes and set up and pretend to be living in the Neolithic age or something. So it was like a zoo of people. And there's one letter to the editor that I've ever found in the PI or the Times protesting this. But generally speaking, reporters of the day, 1909, found this amusing. They found it titillating. The titillating part was that people were very, compared to the way most people dressed in 1909 in Seattle, they had very little clothing on. You had to pay to get in. So anyway, the fair is not just about the Igorots. It's about a lot. It's the Alaska, Yukon, Pacific Exposition. And those are the three legs of Seattle's prosperity in 1909. 1909-10 really marks the end of the Klondike gold rushes. The IWW, the Wobblies. So the Wobblies come together in Chicago in 1906, but they spread in the West like wildfire. And the songbook is in a number of collections, but it's really quite wonderful. It was intended, as it says, to fan the flames of discontent. And I thought I'd sing you a little bit of one of these songs and see if it fans your flames. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? The union makes us strong. Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever. The union makes us strong. You did that so well. This is the pyramid of the capitalist system that the workers, the IWWs, believed in. They wanted one big union, one big strike, one big revolution. So no AFL-CIO where you're a machinist and you're an electrician and you're a carpenter and you all have your own unions. No, no, no. The IWWs organized everybody from the engineers to the janitors, all in one union. Women, people of color, new immigrants, the IWW organized everyone. And this poster hung on the walls of the wobbly reading rooms in Seattle, Bellingham, everywhere. So up at the top of the pyramid of capitalism, you see the sack of money. That's what everyone aspires to. Beneath that, you see some clerics. And the motto to my right is, "We rule you." Pardon me, got that wrong. The second level from the top are statesmen, kings, presidents, prime ministers. We rule you. The lower level below that, we fool you. Those are the clerics. You'll have pie in the sky when you die and a sweet by and by. So don't make any fuss here. So ministers, priests, rabbis, they fool you. Then below that, says World War I time, we shoot at you. So you can lose your life fighting someone very like you from another country for a purpose you don't understand at all. We rule you, we fool you, we shoot at you, we eat for you. And here we have a big linen-covered table with people gorging themselves on very fancy food and very fancy champagne, and at the bottom of it all, failing, exhausted, dying of consumption, you see the workers who support it all. This is the argument of the Wobblies. In the woods during World War I, the Wobblies became militant and refused to cut spruce for Boeing's planes that were used in the war. They poured sugar into gas tanks. They spiked trees so that when you sawed them, your saw would go like that. And the woods were nationalized during World War I by soldiers in order to prevent that. Again, have to go fast to get done. So the Wobblies are radical, but so is the Ku Klux Klan. And The Watcher on the Tower was published here in Seattle and distributed throughout the Pacific Northwest. The Watcher on the Tower, you see there the apposition of Lady Liberty with a torch in her hand and the Klansman with a torch in his. These are meant to be equivalent in this argument. And the Klan, the Constitution, and the Cross, all three Ks, Klan, Constitution, and the Cross, Creed of Liberty. I can't quite make all that out. But this publication was published in Seattle for the Klan. There's been scholarship that suggests that the Klan was more like a fraternal order. And I guess I'd like to argue against that. This is from The Watcher on the Tower, 1923, Why I Am a Klansman. Because this is my country, my native country, and my flag. This is America, I'm an American. Protestant Anglo-Saxon blood is the heart and soul of the foundation of this republic. Our forefathers were baptized in their own blood for constitutional rights because they nationalized and immortalized America. The separation of church and state and free public schools is part of the Constitution. The Roman Catholic Church is now and has been insidiously working in various ways through our public schools to make America Catholic. The Ku Klux Klan is now using and will continue to use its mighty influence to forestall any and every such move by or for the Catholic Church. Skip down to 9, because the Ku Klux Klan is 100% for white supremacy, 100% for restricted immigration, Protestantism, and Americanism. And it just kind of goes on. So this is not a fraternal order, or if it is, it's a bizarre fraternal order. This is very explicit and clear about what is feared here. I wanted to read one more thing. Yes, this is 1923. And in 1924, just to sort of hang this on something, there were 55,000 people who went to a Klan convention in Issaquah, Washington. 55,000 is a lot of people in 1924. And they weren't there to fix hot dogs. They were there because they believed in white supremacy. I think this is just beautiful. I just wanted to lighten your mood a little bit. I think this is a lovely work of commercial art. This is the Hit Fireworks Company. Some of you from Rainier Valley may know Hit Hill. I think it's used less and less as a term, but Hit Hill was a hill that overlooked the valley, and the Hit Fireworks Company was on top of it, and it regularly blew up and burned, and it was not a good neighbor, but it left us some great art here. This is another piece of art. This is a watercolor by Ronald Debs Ginther, held at the Washington State History Museum. And there's a big narrative going on in this image. This is the heart of the Great Depression. The unemployment rate in Washington State during the Great Depression averaged 35%. And that's across the whole state. So that's agriculture, that's all kinds of jobs. You see in the back there the railroad, the train, and men riding the rails. They're riding the top of the boxcars. They have no job. They are on the road hoping to find work. In the foreground, we have these guys who have stolen or worked for a chicken or a shin of beef or something to make mulligan stew. And mulligan stew is the name of this work of art. You see this guy back here, sort of collegiate looking and a little bit, whoa, where am I? That's Ronald Debs Ginther. And he depicted, his art is available online at the Washington State Historical Society. Ginther, Ginther. He documents the underbelly of Seattle and Tacoma like no other artist does. So the New Deal is part of the Great Depression. When Franklin Delano Roosevelt was voted into office, he vowed to put people to work, and the WPA was one of those programs. We get the Grand Coulee Dam from this. We get the Civilian Conservation Corps. But one thing we get that is completely unique in the United States in this county, and this really is about neighborhood history, are these incredible property record cards. How many of you remember the Twin Teepees restaurant by Green Lake? Yeah, that's it. And that photograph that you see there, that's 1937. So So that's what it looked like then. And if you spend time with these cards, you can see all of the additions and changes that were made to that restaurant, or a house, or a factory, or a house of worship. The property record cards were maintained by the assessor to figure out what to charge you for property tax. So they were very precise about whether you had a toilet inside or you had an outhouse outside, so that your taxes would be accurate. World War II really ended the Great Depression here. And we're pretty familiar with the Boeing story, so I'm not spending much time on it, but the shipyard story is different. This, again, is the cover of a periodical. It's December of 1942, so about a year after Pearl Harbor. On the Ways is the title of this periodical, and it was published at the Lake Washington shipyards in Kirkland, in Houghton, in Kirkland. And you see there Santa Claus dressed with a hard hat and overalls with a seaplane tender. Those are the ships that were built for the Navy at this shipyard. And just to give you a sense of the momentum of World War II mobilization, there were 300 workers at this shipyard in 1939. There were 8,500 workers at this shipyard in 1942. And that's not just Lake Washington shipyard, that's everywhere. It was just huge. After Pearl Harbor, the opportunity to remove the Issei and Nisei from farms, businesses, and fishing boats throughout Washington had justification, or took justification. So we find people who had militated against Japanese people for decades suddenly saying, oh, well, now we're at war, you know. These people look exactly like the enemy. Clearly, we cannot trust them. They will form a third column movement. And when there's an invasion of Seattle, they will take the part of the invaders. So this, again, is from Kirkland, just coincidentally. And here in Seattle, the curfew of people who, again, were recognizably Japanese began in January of 1942, and then the evacuation and internment of 15,000 people of Japanese descent to internment camps inland continued throughout the war. This is a piece of correspondence. This is a little boy named Dick Kodani who's written a letter to his teacher at Bellevue Elementary School. He's writing from Pinedale, California. You can see at the very top right of the letter, he's in Barracks E, Room 33, or Area 33. And it's just a charming note from a child writing back to his elementary school teacher from this nightmare experience. Throughout the war, people were harassed to buy bonds, eat this, eat that, don't eat this, don't eat that. Almost everything you wanted was rationed. Cigarettes, sugar, tires, you name it. This is a sugar ration coupon. This is the Richland Villager. And throughout World War II, if you talk to older people, older than us, they say, oh, you know, if they were in journalism, they say, we knew what was going on at Richland, but we self-censored ourselves because it was war. So here, the Richland Villager, on the day after the bomb is dropped on Nagasaki, says, it's atomic bombs. And what we were making there was plutonium. Plutonium for the bomb that leveled Nagasaki. That's what Hanford Engineering Works was working on during the war. Without the Grand Coulee Dam, there wouldn't have been a Hanford Engineering Works. They needed that flow of cold water for the production of plutonium. Again, during World War II, Braceros, the Braceros program, bringing Mexican immigrants into Washington state to harvest crops. Because so many men had gone into uniform, there simply weren't enough people to do the work. So this is one of the first examples of bringing farm workers from Mexico to Washington state deliberately. This, however, is from 20 years later. The braceros stayed, and they brought their families, and they wanted to eat the food that was part of their culture. I ate at El Ranchito way back in the day, and it was wonderful. But this is a kind of cultural history research that can be done in archives. After World War II, Molt Taylor came home from his assignment in the Navy full of good ideas. innovative ideas. And he got a GI Bill small business loan to start a company to make these things, aero cars, where you would get up above I-5, you would get up above the traffic and fly to where you wanted to go. And when you were done flying, you would put your wheels down and become a car again. There's one of these at the Museum of Flight. It's really, really fun to see. But this is part of a huge wave of innovation after the war. Probably I'm the only person on the planet who enjoys looking at booking photos. But I do, and these are all from Kitsap County. Most of these, this is 1954. And you know, you look at the people on this page, it's diverse and inclusive. And these are women who were Rosie the Riveters, who were Native people, who were Hispanic, who were deserters from their ship, and they're interesting to me, as is the simplicity pattern. Find amazing things in archives. This is the uniform of the housewife. So Rosie the Riveter became Susie the homemaker. And this is her uniform. As she went home from where she begged to be, or she had been begged to become a riveter in a shipyard or at Boeing. Now it was back to the kitchen for you. And this is the kind of dress you should sew and wear. And you can polish linoleum and, you know, raise your kids. And you think of Betty Friedan, you know, and how she would have reacted to this. I think that's fun. I think for many of us Seattle people, Jim Ellis is a sainted figure. And at the Museum Ojai, where I worked for so long, we took his sentiment and made it the organizing principle of our museum. We have the means and the talent to create the city that we want within our own time. We have the means and the talent to create the city that we want within our own time. That is something that should be on a banner, because it really is a reason to live. It's a reason to get up in the morning. It's a reason to make civic innovation. This is Metro. It's part of Metro. Metro's a long and complicated story, and I should be done by now, and I'm not. But getting Metro passed to clean up Lake Washington, it was the first argument that was persuasive. All of the neighborhoods and municipalities around the lake were pouring their sewage directly into the lake. There was no way to clean up the filthy water that was too dirty to swim in unless everybody worked together. And the municipal authority of King County, Metro, organized that and cleaned up Lake Washington. That's the beginning of a long, long story about transportation that we won't go to. Now, let me get a show of hands. Can you give me 5 minutes or 10? Yeah? All right. I understand that I'm going late, and I just am. 1962 World's Fair. Wow, you know, look at the iconography here. The Space Needle is the exclamation mark of the World's Fair, and the monorail is the sinuous pathway onto this marvelous experience of being in 1962, but living in the 21st century when you're at Century 21. 3 million people went to the Alaska-Yukon Pacific Exposition. More than 10 million went to this fair. It's the same motif of opening the window to the world for the people in town, and vice versa. So Seattle really put itself on the map, and you see that phrase again and again and again. But what I like is a more obscure image that's in the archives, these science fiction, science fantasy understandings of what the World's Fair was. You see a Space Needle, but it looks like the front of a science fiction book from the 1950s. And this is the fair that Bill Gates and Paul Allen both talked about I know Allen's dead, but in their interviews, that as boys, they went to the fair and they learned what a problem was. They learned that in the U.S. Pavilion, the Pacific Science Center. How do you sketch a problem? And then how do you break it out so that you can have solutions, you can ask questions about it? That was a habit of mind that museum taught them. So I am interested in archives. I am interested in museums. I think they make big changes. Century 21 was just a huge museum. This is a Theodore Ruthke document from the Ruthke collection at the University of Washington. It's one of his drafts of a poem called The Rose. And just to be able to, Theodore Roethke is a well-known poet internationally, but he was also on the faculty at the UW, and he left his papers there. And you can see the poet at work here, crossing things out, changing his ideas, changing his approach. It's as exciting as anything can be. And he premiered this poem at Century 21. It was an era when you could get an audience like this for a new poem by Theodore Roethke. And I tried quickly today to find out how many times he filled the house, but I just couldn't. But it was many times that he read it again and again and again, and there was standing room only for a poem. Isn't that just magnificent? But Century 21 was also a Cold War fair. And this is the Puget Sound School of Anti-Communism. This took place during the run of the fair. And this is the back cover of a program that talks about the lectures that are going to be given there on how to deal with parents of students in your class who are fellow travelers, how to remove books from your student library that are questionable in their loyalty. That's what the Puget Sound School of Anti-Communism was about. The John Birch Society is very active here in Central Puget Sound, at least 3 reading rooms that I'm aware of in the community. The Cardinal Mindszenty Foundation for Catholics, a very right-wing grassroots organization. And it's probably important to say that at this Cold War fair, the Soviet Union did not show at the fair, nor did any of the Iron Curtain countries, as they were called, nor did North Korea. So it was, in a sense, a Cold War fair. And this is from the King County Defense Council telling you how to dig a fallout shelter under your house. Because the sense was that as Boeing moved from B-17 and B-29 production to post-war aerospace, that it remained ground zero for attack. So digging these fallout shelters, I mean, isn't that great? This goes on for pages and pages telling you how to dig out your basement to put in a fallout shelter. Argument about fluoridation. Okay, I thought this might be kind of fun nowadays. So on the left, we have vote yes for fluoridation, and on the right, it's poison, right? Do you want to drink this? This argument went through the 50s. Fluoridation was not introduced to Seattle City Water until 1968. Because of this argument. One of the major periodicals of the counterculture here in Seattle is the Helix. And the Helix, edited by Paul Dorpat, who is still with us, still living, and drawn, illustrated, as you see here, by Walt Crowley, who no longer is. So this is the Sky River Rock Festival, Labor Day, 1968. Who went? Does anybody remember going? So you look at the bands that are here, and I don't know anyone who went who saw all these bands. I'm not sure that they all came, but it was just an absolutely fantastic Woodstocky kind of thing here in Seattle, Metro Seattle, out in Sultan. For many people here, I think the Pike Place Market is our lodestone. It is the place that we go, that we return to, that really means Seattle to us. And it's almost hard to believe that that 1907 legacy was threatened in the 1960s with demolition and replacement by high-rise office towers and apartments. And Victor Steinbrook, whose name you see at the bottom of the Friends of the Market iconography there, was the president of the Friends of the Market, who agitated, organized in order to vote to keep the market and to resist that kind of development. Sam Smith was elected to 5 terms in the Washington State House of Representatives, and I think most significant achievement, he was responsible for the open housing legislation in Washington State. It took his leadership, it took his kindness. He was a delightful person. He returned from the state to the city council. It's usually the other way around, but he came back to Seattle as the first black member of the Seattle City Council, and I really am getting there. 737. 737's had its ups and downs. This is a good year. This is 1973, And the idea here, this is a Boeing advertisement, that this plane was making the world more neighborly, that it was making it smaller. It made it easier to fly. And 737s have had their problems. But tonight, now, as we speak, a Boeing 737 takes off or lands every 1.2 seconds on this planet. That's market penetration. Another thing I like to do when I can't sleep is look at patents. And I want you to, well, what do you do? I want you to look at this and not shout out what it is, but it's a lot of fun to search this USPTO database. You can use locales, you can use periods of time, you can use kinds of innovations. So this patent is for, well, I won't tell you what it's for. It was issued in 1995 to a Mercer Island firm. A guy named David Giuliani was the head of that firm. Can you recognize this? How many of you own one of these? It's a Sonicare, right? It's a Sonicare toothbrush. And again, in trying to prepare for tonight, Philips has taken over Sonicare quite a while ago. But trying to find out how many million of these have been sold. I can't tell you. I couldn't find it, but it's a lot. This is maybe the neatest document here, and I won't stop with this. This is in a box at the top of Mount Rainier. If you get to hold this in your hands, it's been brought down and put in an archive, or you've climbed all the way up there and you get to open it up and write in it, I was here. I did this. I accomplished this. And it's a marvelous thing to read. There's more pages of it in the book. But one of these wonderful notes here, this man says, I climbed this when I was 20, and I climbed it again today on my 50th birthday. Isn't that just really, really nice? Gay Pride event, the first Gay Pride event was 1974. And this poster is from 1995. This is an enduring and important part of Seattle's metropolitan history. You see the quote here, no one is free until all is free. I had forgotten that's Frederick Douglass. I'm not sure if you all knew that, but it is. So in 1995 too, Microsoft introduced Windows in Redmond, of all crazy places for a company like this to land, with the Rolling Stones, Start Me Up, and big circus tents full of entertainment. And the goal of the Microsoft company then, to put a computer on every desk and in every home. Very different from IBM, very different from anything that had gone before. It was a populist perspective. So that is that. And thank you for your courtesy. Thank you for letting me go over. I don't know if you have any comments or questions or just want to go to bed.
Yeah, I'm writing the family history, and my dad shared when he left Saskatoon and headed across Canada, he worked in one of the logging camps where the Wobblies were very strong, and he actually witnessed them putting spikes into the trees. And part of that was the working conditions were so bad.
Terrible.
My dad said, you know, where he slept was full of bugs, and the food was not fit to serve to animals. And so the Wobblies said, you know, if you're not going to change, we'll let you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, true.
Do you know anything about the gold mine north in Stehekin?
The gold mine. No. I mean, I know where Stehekin is, but I don't know anything about a gold mine there. I'm sorry. I wore you all down, didn't I?
Here's another question.
Just a little personal question, not comment. My grandfather and his cousins, the Goodman brothers, went up to Alaska to get gold, and they were successful. Came back here, and my grandfather did not invest his share well. But the Goodman brothers were two of the prominent founders of the Pike Place Market.
Cool. All right, I release you. Go get the book in the library.
Thank you so much for sharing this.